Do you dream of moving to Italy, but you're not sure where to begin or how to begin? It can feel pretty overwhelming. But you're not alone. There are professionals who can help you. Hi everyone, my name is Manuela Rumsey and I'm a licensed American real estate agent in Vicenza, Italy. Today, I'm going to speak with relocation specialist Damien O'Farrell. For over 30 years, Damien has advised thousands of people from all over the world on how to successfully move to Italy. From helping them navigate Italy's complex bureaucracy to pairing them with immigration lawyers and so much more, Damien provides tailored services to each of his clients. If you're serious about moving to Italy, then you really need to hear what Damien has to say.
I am originally from Ireland. I moved to Italy in 1988. Um, and I've now been working in the sector of global mobility for over 3 decades. And in that time, I've worked on over 10,000 relocations into Italy, both corporate and private.
You've probably seen it all by now, but there's always
Oh,
something new
there's
under the sun, right?
there's very little that I haven't seen at this point.
And I know this is probably a tough one to put into a small nutshell, but if you could just say what you think is the most difficult thing about moving to Italy that people experience.
The language, without a doubt. If they speak little or no Italian, they underestimate incredibly how challenging it's going to be without the language. Okay? Because first of all, your interactions with Italians are going to be very superficial. Okay? You won't be able to get to know the people. And I would think that one of the reasons why you move to another country is because you want to spend time with the people. Okay. Then you have to rely on other people maybe to help you, which doesn't make you independent. And so I would say the most challenging aspect of moving to Italy, if you don't speak the language, is the lack of the language.
So it sounds like if you can give yourself a running start by learning some before you get to Italy, it's going to really help you in the long run.
90 hours. You need to complete at least a 90-hour course of Italian before coming to Italy because 90 hours, more or less, is one level.
Oh,
So you really need that as a basis. So at least, when you go to the bar, you're not pointing with your finger, for what you want. And the more that you can be independent, you can get on with your life, the the more chance you have that your life is going to be what you want in Italy.
so what is the biggest misconception that you've noticed people have when about moving to Italy or about living in Italy?
I would say that it's their perception of Italy. Okay. I think that a lot of people come on vacation, and being on vacation is extremely different from actually living here. I think a lot of people think it's going to be warm all the time, for example, and it's not. Um, they think it's essentially going to be a lot easier than it is sometimes. So I think that's the main um, thing that people think. And then when it's not always like that, they can get a little bit disappointed. So I work a lot with helping people to balance their expectations with reality. Okay. And you can see that, from questions that come up. People want to move to a small town, but they're asking about job opportunities. And there aren't going to be any job opportunities. Okay. So, you know, my work is revolves a lot around guiding people to a place where they understand what they're really getting themselves into and what may be the best place for them to live in comparison to another place.
And what about the logistics and the bureaucracy? Italy's famous, of course, for its bureaucracy. and people who move here will have to deal with it quite a bit. What do you find to be some of the biggest roadblocks or stumbling blocks?
Well, I would say if you are a non-EU citizen, the most challenging bureaucratic obstacle you're going to have is what visa can you realistically apply for? Okay. Because unfortunately, as a non-EU citizen, you're limited to 90 days in a 180-day period. And if you want to go beyond that 90 days, you're going to need a long-term visa. So that I would say for the non-EU people is probably the biggest obstacle. But even with the EU people, depending on where you go, registering at the town hall is not always straightforward because you supply all the documents that they say they want, and then suddenly there's another document that they want, and it can take some time. So I would say visa slash registration is probably the most challenging. And renting a property if you are in a sought after market. The competition is ferocious.
Yeah. Yeah, as a real estate agent, I can certainly attest to that. Renting is a lot more difficult than people can often think it is, for sure.
It's basically a landlord's market. And a lot of people underestimate that. If the landlord has a sought after property, he has 100 renters outside the door.
So for people who want to experience living in Italy, maybe they're thinking about moving here
Mhm.
long term, but they understand that living here as a tourist is quite different, and they need to gauge how successful they would be. What can they do to have an experience here to be able to see if this is the right choice for them? Is there something they can do given the difficulties with renting and so on?
They have 2 blocks during the year in which they can stay here for up to 90 days. Then they have to go for 90 days, then they can come back. The most important thing is they get granular on where it is they think they would like to live. Okay. And they need to do that based on what is it they want to do, what funds do they have, and based on that, they need to start identifying potential places where they could live. Then they need to go to those places at different times during the year. Okay. Because if you go in the summer with certain seaside towns, they can be very active and it looks like a great place to live. But then during the winter, these places can become very quiet. Some of the restaurants close. So you need to spend as much time as you can in the place where you would like to live. And you need to go to the supermarket. You need to go to the post office. You need to do all the things that you would do if you actually lived there.
And so would you describe then choosing precisely where you think you might like to live in Italy as the first step, or in all the steps that, given visa and housing and all these kinds of things that you just mentioned, what's really the most what's the first step for someone who's just beginning their journey?
Why? Why do you want to come to Italy? What is it you want to achieve here? Okay. And when you get clear on the why, then the how becomes clearer. Okay. If you want to come to Italy as a retiree, for example, you essentially have more choices. Okay. If you're coming to Italy as a foreigner and you want to work here, then your options are more limited. You may need to be then in and around Milan, which of course is going to increase the cost of living. And so you need to take that into consideration. It starts with why do you want to come here? What is it you want to achieve? And where do you think you can do that? For example, if you have a location independent business, again, you can work practically anywhere in Italy as long as you've got a good internet connection. If you're coming as a retired person, that puts you in a totally different type of situation. You can basically live anywhere. You don't need to work. Based on what the person wants, would, why they're coming to Italy will really determine where they need to go and what that's going to involve and what it's going to look like. Anybody who's helping with the visa process, they can guide you with the visa, but you need to be clear on why you're coming here. So you need to go within, when people say, oh, I'm tired of, I want a slower way of life. Hmm, okay. Well, that may not be what you get in Italy, because if you have to work, like a lot of my neighbors in Rome, they leave home at 7:30 in the morning and they come home at 7:30 in the evening, and they're not taking naps and they're not doing passeggiate. So how relaxed your life in Italy is going to depend on your personal circumstances.
Let's say someone has figured that out. I know
Hmm.
that I want to work remotely, and I love Italy because I went there on vacation and fell in love with it. And I think I'd like to live somewhere near Rome or Florence, or they have some idea. Can they, if they think they've got these things figured out, do they really need to rely on an immigration attorney? When can someone proceed without having to get that kind of assistance? And when do you think it's really, or should everybody just say, you know what, this is complicated. If I try to do this on my own, I might make a bunch of mistakes. I mean, can you talk to that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if the person has done considerable scouting trips, okay, so they've spent enough time in Italy, ideally where they would like to go to live, and they come to the conclusion, yes, I would like to live here, then of course the next step to that, in the case of a non-EU citizen, is they will require a visa. Okay? Now Italy follows the civil law system. So a lawyer is not always necessarily in play with what they want to do. Okay? So once they want to get here, working with a lawyer or another global mobility professional will help them initially with regards to identifying what visa they can apply for. These professionals will also help them put together a bulletproof application, because the number one reason an application gets denied is because the information is not presented in the correct manner, or it's flimsy. Something is just not right about the application. So working with a professional at that point makes a lot of sense. But then a lot of the heavy lifting has to be done by the person themselves. So then they have to apply to the consulate, and ideally the professional has prepared them for that interview. Okay. The lawyer can be helpful if there's overreach by the consulate. They're asking for stuff that is not required, or they're dragging their feet. Okay. Then the lawyer can intervene on behalf of the client and move that along. Okay. But it might not get to that because it depends on where you are applying, because some consulates have a very high volume of applications and others don't have that many. So a lot of the time, once they've worked with a professional, they've prepared all the documents, prepare the application, then they can submit it on their own. And then very often it's just a question of going to the consulate, doing the interview, and waiting, for their passport to come back with a stamp.
How far out ahead of time? So let's say you have a non-EU person who's just at the beginning of the process and they're thinking, I'd like at some point in the future, but I don't know when because I don't know how long this is going to take. What kind of time frame do you suggest people kind of consider to be what they may be looking at?
I would say at least 8 to 9 months before the move. You need to give yourself time. I mean, it's very case specific, but I would say that if you have decided you're moving to Italy, you would need to start to get the ball rolling 8 to 9 months in advance of actually moving here.
I think I saw someone on, I don't know, TikTok or something the other day, just post a video saying, I'm just going to get on an airplane and go to Italy, and what happens, happens. And I don't know if this is something that you encounter a lot, but I would imagine some people don't realize that no, it doesn't really work that way. But can people get on an airplane, go to Italy, and once they're there, apply for a visa?
No, because you can't get a visa in Italy. The visa has to be done beforehand. Information is the number one thing in relocating. So if you make a very rash move and you're not very informed, based on what I have seen, most of those relocations don't work out. It takes about 5 years for you to really kind of settle into Italy, to get to know the people, to find your rhythm.
So if people want to learn more to make the best decision they can about the things that are involved, about the timing, about visas, about the reality of living in Italy before they actually come here, so that they don't just get on a plane and cross their fingers. What are the kinds of things that they can do while they're still outside of Italy to help them make a more informed decision, to understand the why and maybe realize what they're going to be experiencing if they do decide to come here?
I think there's a lot of good content online sometimes, but people need to understand that a lot of that content is specific to the person who made the content. Okay. I send out my own newsletter that people can read, which is very low noise. It's the facts. Okay. It might not always be what people want to hear, but my goal is to help people to relocate long term and to thrive, not to have a transient type of experience. So before they get to Italy, they can listen to people that provide content that is solid, okay? That the person has a proven track record in what they do, or they are what I call a lifer. They've been in Italy for a considerable period of time, and they're really talking from a place of knowledge, that it's not within sort of the honeymoon period, okay, that they have really experienced Italy, okay? If you listen to the content of somebody who is a retiree, for example, okay, they will be able to talk to what it's like to live as a retiree. But as they've probably never worked in Italy, they won't be able to give you much input on what it's like to look for a job, to work in Italy, what are the terms and conditions, and so on and so forth. So you need to listen to people that are essentially living the dream or goal that you have in mind.
What are the kinds of sources or places that you would point people to be able to get that sort of information?
Well, I mean, the best thing for them to do is to actually spend time in Italy. Okay, I mean, no online information or joining an Italian cultural association locally is going to replace that experience. Now, of course, it's better than nothing. But what really is going to give you insight into Italy is actually coming here and spending time. There's no way around that.
Are there things that make it possible for not just a university student or high school student, but an individual who's thinking, okay, I'd like to have a more authentic experience. Maybe I could go live with the family, I could go work on a farm, or I could do something to sort of to have a more direct connection
Hmm.
to a place and not just sort of be that tourist who's staying in an Airbnb or a hotel for a few
Yeah, I
days.
mean, there are solutions like that available. I don't personally work with them, but someone can go stay with a family. And so if you stay with a family, you will see how the family lives. They might take you to the supermarket, they might take you to the doctors if they've got an appointment. So you can really get a glimpse into everyday life in Italy. Yeah, that's certainly available. But again, I mean, it's going to depend on the family that you go to stay with.
Are there costs that people aren't typically anticipating that might come as a surprise or things that they should keep in mind?
I think what surprises a lot of people are the initial costs to renting an apartment. Okay. So, because people think that, they don't take into consideration the realtor's fee, which in certain parts of Italy can be 2 months. It can be a percentage, a yearly percentage. Then you've got the first month's rent, you've got the deposit, that could be 2 or 3 months, depending. So, if you're renting a property for 1,500, you need to multiply that by 4 or 5, possibly 6 months of upfront fees.
Sounds like there's a lot of planning really for someone who wants to spend an extended period of time in Italy.
It's a major life move. So it needs to be planned properly. Um, Otherwise, it may not work out, or it could be very challenging. Um, and again, it goes back to, why are you coming to Italy? If we can get clear on the why, then we can get clear on how, and we can get clear on the what. But it all comes back to, what are you looking for here?
Is there something that you would want people to know that we haven't talked about? Is there something that maybe your clients tell you with the benefit of hindsight? This is the advice that I would give to people now that I've experienced this and now that I've lived the things that you've talked about.
They always come back saying that they wish they had learned the language better before coming here. They underestimated that. Um, People underestimated the cost of renovating a property. They underestimated culture shock. It's always got to do with what I spoke about earlier, the lack of planning. You know, that's what they come back to me with. They say, I really wish that I had listened to you when you told me to do the 90-hour course, because now I'm here in this remote part of Italy and no one speaks my language. And it's very tedious and challenging, to navigate the system. So the more you prepare, the more chance you have of the relocation working out. Now, of course, Manuela, there are going to be exceptions. Some people are going to come on a wing and a prayer, and somehow it works out. But generally speaking, if you plan your relocation to Italy, you have a much greater chance that it's going to be successful.
Well, that sounds like a really good note to end on. But before we do, Damien, I want to make sure if people would like to get in touch with you, I'm going to include your information in the link and so on. Is it best to send you an email, call you? What do you prefer?
It's best they send me an email. They can send me an email directly at damien@damienofarrell.com, and I will certainly get back to them and answer any queries that they have.
Well, is there anything else that you think we should cover? Because like I said, I think we got through quite a bit, and your answers have been very direct and very clear.
Well, I'm extremely pragmatic. Okay. Um, I've been in Italy a very long time. Um, I've gone through a lot of things, starting my own business, also doing some work for other people, having to battle with the banks for a mortgage. So, I have this experience that I hope that I'm able to help other people avoid certain pitfalls. Okay? Because unfortunately, a lot of the information available online is missing pieces. Okay? Um, or it's out of sequence, or it's missing steps, and people get the wrong information. And I would say that one of the things I think is very important, and this is not to promote myself, but to work with professionals, work with licensed realtors, okay, people that know what they're doing, okay, um, work with people that have a proven track in taxation, okay. I saw something recently on the internet, and this woman was asking about taxes, and someone told her that her taxes in Italy would work out. Okay. I'm not sure how that's going to happen. And, you know, there are there are certain things for which working with a professional will save you time, energy, and money. And this is very important. And that there are people that they do their due diligence.
Thank you. This is enormously helpful information, and I'm sure that anybody who watches this video is definitely going to benefit from it.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure.
All right. Take care. Ciao.
Bye-bye.
If you'd like to contact Damien, you can find his information in the link tree below this video. And if you're interested in buying property in Italy and would like representation, please contact me through my website, www.italyhomebuyer.com. And until next time from Vicenza, Italy, arrivederci.